Australia is widely recognized as a major player in the worldwide education sector, with its reputation as a top study destination firmly established. Now, recently there has been growing recognition of the value of an Australian education which provides Indian students with opportunities for a successful international career. Universities are laying emphasis on supporting entrepreneurship and industry partnerships, continuous learning and talent development, as well as government policies and funding that encourage innovation and partnerships. Now, these are the main drivers behind Australia's strong reputation in this field. Welcome to the second episode of Australian Government and Study Australia present Australian Edge for India's Century in partnership with Times Network. And today on this episode, we're focusing on studying in Australia, all that you need to know. We have with us today Professor Brian Schmidt. He's the Vice Chancellor and President at the Australian National University. We have Professor Carolyn Evans. She's the Vice Chancellor and President at Griffith University. And we have Dr. Monica Kennedy, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner with the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. Ladies, sir, thank you so much for joining me here today. Brian, if I could start off with you first. How has Australia managed to establish a prominent position in the global education market, and what do you think are some of the factors that contribute to its reputation as a highly desirable study destination?
So I think one of the reasons why Australia has sort of emerged is because it became a focus of attention of both the Australian universities and the Australian government. So Australia has made itself a very attractive place to go. It's an incredibly safe destination. It is a multicultural country that you will literally, if you're from India or quite frankly from anywhere in Southeast Asia, you're going to find a huge diaspora here. Some who have been here many generations. And so it makes it feel like something where you belong. But the government's willingness to really support students so that they have a great time here, I think is important. So, if you come and do for example, a bachelor's degree, you get 4 years work rights. And so that's quite attractive because it means you can, kind of carry on if that's what you want to do. Quality, really important here as well. So Australia has relative to, for example, the United States or even the United Kingdom, it's a pretty highly regulated system. And so our universities tend to be bigger, and there's no bad universities in Australia. So you get a pretty uniform, I think, time when you come here. There's no real bad experiences. And finally, it's a great place to live. And when students see that, they're like, that's a great place to study. It's uncomplicated and it's excellent.
Well, that's a very important point, that it is open to all people and it provides, it accepts them. And Carolyn, I just want to take one point ahead that Brian said. He said there are no bad universities. So what distinguishes Australia's academic capabilities and exceptional quality of educational offer? Because, it's evidenced by the fact that 7 of its 43 universities are ranked among the top 100 in the world. What is your view on that?
It's an extraordinary achievement for a relatively small country. We've focused on having a smaller number of universities, but of having really high quality institutions. So the fundamentals have to be in place. High quality faculty, people who are well trained, and indeed many Australians will have degrees, or many people who are teaching in Australia will come from around the world, and many Australians like myself will have trained overseas at some point in their time. So we really get people who understand global best practice here in Australia. We're very serious about teaching. Teaching is not some secondary activity. It's something that's fundamental to what we do. We are, as Brian said, highly regulated when it comes to teaching, but we're in fact also very self-motivated. So if you come to Australia, you'll get opportunities to engage with other students, and those students will come from around the world. You'll get a chance to engage with industry or the health sector or the school sector or wherever you're going to really develop some of those professional work skills. And you'll have the opportunity to engage in often very cutting-edge uses of technology and other forms of new modes of teaching. So that's the fundamentals. If you don't get that right, nothing else works.
Monica, in your experience, and you've been interacting with so many Indians, how does the Australian education provide Indian students with unique benefits, and how does it facilitate their pursuit of, getting an international career?
In Australia, we have really clear expectations of universities that they will engage with industry and deliver cutting-edge qualifications that are up to date, and they're bringing students through so that they're ready for a global career, and they're ready to hit work running if that's what they choose to do after their study. We also have great research relationships. So there's the industry-university relationship, there's the university-to-university relationship, and we see great connections between Australian institutions and Indian ones too. Practice-based learning is something that people are very familiar with. Opportunities to engage in work while students are studying. Opportunities for students to challenge and critique within the classroom means that there's a culture that builds within classrooms and within universities where students are really encouraged to bring their whole selves to class, to engage with their peers in ways that are really extending themselves and bringing the latest ideas from all around the world into an Australian classroom. And then Australian institutions really focus then on encouraging students firstly to work while they study.
Yes.
So
yes.
Making sure that they're continuing to develop those skills that you need in work while they're studying, to stay on in Australia and to use the fabulous education they've developed once they've finished studying, and then to take those experiences and qualifications right across the globe. So something we're very focused on is a global career in Australia.
Very important there. That's really important, Monica, and it's a great thing that that's happening and that's being provided to the students there. Carolyn, I'll come back to you. How does Australia's role in shaping the global education landscape compare to that of other countries with highly regarded, higher education systems, and what impact does it have on the wider world?
I think Australia's been an absolute global leader when it comes to international education. For many countries, this is peripheral or something they've come to relatively recently, some small part of the university. But for Australia, for some decades now, international students and international education has been absolutely core. Now, we have a very outward-looking approach to education. That's not just about bringing students from around the world to Australia. A lot of Australian students are very keen to get out into our region, across the globe, to have those experiences. And as so many of our faculty spend a lot of time engaging with their colleagues all over the world. And so it's that cosmopolitanism, it's that sense that we are engaged with the whole world that I think really sets us apart and helps our students be prepared for a career that might start for a couple of years with a visa in Australia. It might involve going back to India at some point, but it might involve working in all sorts of parts of the world. It was said earlier, there is no such thing as a local business or a local career anymore. Even small country towns here in Australia are looking at ways that they can engage with global markets, global audiences, global interest in their service. So, I think that's where Australia has really led the way.
Wow, that's really important, and it's good to see that focus. Brian, my next question is, what are some of the policies and measures that the Australian government has put in place to support international students in their pursuit of a high-quality education, and how are these initiatives contributing to the growth of Australia's education sector?
So we talked a little bit about allowing students to work while they're here. And of course, we want students to really focus on their studies, especially when they first arrive. But because we're allowing people to work 48 hours a fortnight, and I think it's important to remember this is quality work. So Australia has the highest minimum wage in the world. So you're not kind of scraping things together. You're actually, as Carolyn said, liable to be working in a company that is of interest to you and being well paid for it. So I think that's a policy framework that Australia's had for decades, and it's still best in the world. As we said earlier, Australia really does regulate things to make sure that every experience is a good one. And we have a whole bunch of experiences where, as Carolyn said, students get the opportunity now and an expectation that they're going to integrate what we call work integrated learning. So those experiences in industry or outside the university alongside their experiences within the university. And so together, I guess, students get what is a real, an education that's ready to get them up and going really quickly. The visa situation here been a little problematic during COVID, but I think it's recovering quickly, and it's been a huge focus to get that going. And so it is a seamless system, and one where the students are treated with respect and, quite frankly, seen as the huge opportunity that these students are. And that's why I think the Australian government lays down the red carpet relative to other countries.
Monica, but to what extent does an Australian education impact the long-term career prospects of students and some of the skills and competencies that you feel it imparts to these students so that they can progress well in their career?
Well, we've spoken a lot about industry engagement in universities, and I think it's absolutely critical. We've spoken too about how our policies and structures support quality delivery in Australia, and one of the ways in which we do that is through the Australian Qualification Framework, which is the anchor on which really that India and Australia have been able to commit to each other and qualifications recognition. And another part of that is the ESOS Act, that we have an act of Parliament for education services for overseas students that means that a student is protected from the moment that they engage in a conversation about Australian education and until the time that they complete their study. They're protected within Australia, and it's quite a unique a unique set of circumstances in which a student can come to Australia, have a safe, warm, and top quality experience in one of the leading universities in the world. We've talked about the quality of Australian universities. We really punch above our weight. You'll see on this panel we've got a Nobel Prize winner as a Vice-Chancellor for a university. We've got extraordinary talent both in the leadership of our institutions and in the delivery of them. But that's all supported too by a really robust regulatory system so that our universities remain top quality. And as a result of that, they are stimulating internationalisation within the classroom, within our institutions and within the communities around Australia. And it's this globalisation, it's this interest in globalisation, interest in industry engagement and a focus on the way that research and education work together that deliver students that are ready to go to the world.
But this is a very important point that you brought up, Monica, about the fact that the government, so it's all the way from the top to as local, like Carolyn said. So it's great that everyone is working and welcoming the students because what I believe is where students are comfortable is where they can give more than their 100% and grow for their own growth and for wherever companies, universities that they get to. Well, we are unfortunately just about out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much, Monica, for coming in and discussing this with us. But ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. The conversation continues after this short break on Australian Government and Study Australia present Australian Edge for India Century in partnership with Times Network. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to Australian Government and Study Australia present Australian Edge for India Century in partnership with Times Network. Now in this segment, we shall be highlighting the importance of Australia's education sector in preparing students for success in the global job market and driving economic growth through innovation. And to discuss this, we have with us Professor Paddy Nixon. He's Vice-Chancellor and President at the University of Canberra. We have Ravin Mirchandani. He's the Chairman at Powertron and Accensus. And we have Dr. Monica Kennedy, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner, Australian Trade and Investment Commission. Gentlemen, Monica, thank you so much for joining me here. Paddy, let's start with you. What are the specific competencies and skill sets that Australian universities are imparting to graduates that make them highly sought after by employers in the global job market? And how are these universities adapting to changing industry demands and trends?
So first and foremost, the Australian universities deliver world-class technical skills to their graduates. But the reason I think Australian students are valued internationally and are competitive in an international market is the additional pieces we layer in. The communication and collaboration skills, which are an essential part, the problem-solving skills. So it's not just about the technologies, it's how they're used in real-world situations. And a global perspective. So Australia is such an international university sector. It's the largest export market in Australia is engaging with international students. So we've got a really diverse and engaged student population that's from around the world, and they go out and they build a global perspective for our students.
So true and so on point. Monica, I'll bring you in. So in India, we love entrepreneurship. There is so much of a boost to entrepreneurship here. Startups are very much in focus here. But how can Australian universities better support and foster entrepreneurship among students and graduates? And, what new initiatives, programs, what new innovations are being done so that startups and small businesses can thrive?
Would jump immediately to thinking about what courses are offered to support students in entrepreneurship. And there's about 600 courses available across Australia, specifically teaching in entrepreneurship. But more broadly than that, Australian institutions are really engaged with industry to provide Indian industry experience projects. They're doing research with industry, and that research is turning into commercial opportunities. They're running all kinds of incubation centres within the universities that are supporting students to get together and to bring an idea to reality. We have a few projects running that the Australian government runs as well. The Study Australia India Experience Project, for example, is a great example for where international students get together in teams right across Australia in all kinds of disciplines, where they work on real life projects for real industry partners, and then they pitch on their project.
Robin, just wanting to bring you in from your experience, if you could share your thoughts on, what are the ways that MNCs can build stronger partnerships with Australian universities to access cutting edge research and development opportunities, and how universities can leverage these collaborations to generate new sources of funding and even revenue.
Thanks very much for that, Sumit. When I did my MBA in the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane in the early 90s, our marketing professor always said, your MBA has a 5-year shelf life. After that, you're going to have to go out and do it all over again. And I think that's down to 2 now. And what Australian universities are good at is actually updating their content to be real world relevant. And I think that's the reason Australia is a really good choice for Indian students. One of the problems we have in India is that students, when they come out of universities, companies that employ them, you have to train them all over again because they have a piece of paper that says they understand the theory of marketing or the theory of relativity, but that's about it. As a company, you start from zero and you're the university that has to train them. Employing students that are graduates from Australia actually saves a lot of cost, saves a lot of time, because your internship period is not 3 years, you're running within 3 months. To your question about what universities and MNCs can do, I think there's a bit of a bias in that question because of the word MNC. We have this feeling that only multinational conglomerates would be the ones that be willing to take the risks to engage. However, I would hazard that there's a lot of Indian companies that would be very willing to engage with Australian universities to get the benefits that they would normally not have access to. So I'd say that question is, how can Indian companies, not just multinational companies, have access to Australian universities? And I would be very keen to see a program developed like the French have, where VSNEs can come for a year, sent by the French government instead of military service to work with companies in India. And you'd have, a few hundred every year who come to India, who get excellent access to fantastic resumes, great companies to work with, and go back with friends, often partners, because they come at such a young age. So I'd love to see that happen with Australian universities in India.
Paddy, if you could provide some examples of some successful partnerships between Australian universities and companies, and what were some of the key factors that contributed to the success, and how can these collaborations be replicated or scaled to maximize their impact?
Actually, those sort of partnerships either stem from research collaborations or from need in the marketplace for more skilled workers. And we've got some spectacular examples. We've just recently partnered with Cisco, and they're establishing their National Center for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Resilience here in the university, funding 2 professors, but more importantly, embedding their Network Academy courses in our undergraduate IT degrees, so that the students that come out are not only being taught by world-class researchers, as you'd expect, but also have got industry-ready skills alongside the theories and fundamentals of IT that they're working with. Other examples of that from our perspective is working with NASA and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, looking at how astronauts will perform in space. So really at the far end of research, but equally, so it's fundamental to the way universities in Australia work that we will partner with, and we will be encouraged to partner with. The Australian government is prioritizing this sort of relationship with industry.
Well, that's very heartening to know, and a really a bright spot in the way ahead. Ravin, coming back to you, what role do you think ongoing learning and talent development play in preparing graduates for long-term success in the workforce? And how are Australian universities and businesses working together to create more opportunities for professional growth and development?
I think Australia does what it does really well. And Paddy's given you lots of examples. The entire ethic and the DNA of Australian education is very different from Indian. It's merit-based, it's factual, it's made for the real world. Whether you're talking about science, business, marketing, biology, in any field. Every Australian university will give you examples of either having projects with the CSIRO or having projects with NASA. When I studied in QUT in 1993, we were doing 4 projects with NASA. We'd set up a big dish to help NASA cover the dark spots when the space shuttle was going over Australia. And that's for a little university in Australia back then. It wasn't one of the Ivy League top 10 American universities with all their funding. It was a frugal Australian university that had found a way to collaborate with NASA and do something with a bunch of young Aussies sitting out in the desert in Queensland. When you fly every time, you are reminded by the flight attendant about the emergency exits, and they tell you also how to pull the chute to give you the emergency slide. That emergency slide was innovated by an Australian student who joined Qantas in 1970. Wow. Right. And now you're finding Boeing and Airbus, who dominate the sector globally, using something that came out of an innovation that came out from an Australian university with Qantas. I don't want to give you frivolous examples, but there's one.
No, but that's the beauty of it, in the sense that there are so many examples that you're having a tough time to pick a few of them. But that's the beauty of it. That's the importance of it all. We're just about winding up our conversation. But Paddy, if I could get you in on this one point, what role does government policy and funding play in promoting collaboration between Australian universities and companies? And what are some strategies that governments can employ to encourage more innovation, more entrepreneurship in key industries?
Look, the relationship between government, industry and universities is critical. Without that sort of meaningful engagement across all three, I don't think you get the environment that you need. And we've even seen this very recently, the Honourable Jason Clare, Minister for Education, signing with the India's education ministers that mechanism for mutual recognition of qualifications between India and Australia. That simple policy setting will fundamentally change how Australian universities and Indian universities collaborate. And it means that students can move backwards and forwards, which is ultimately going to be significantly better for both industries in both countries. The other areas for me are quite clear. You look internationally, and Australia is a leader in this tax incentives for government to provide tax incentives to multinationals and other companies to engage with universities to do research. You talked a bit earlier about entrepreneurship. Well, I think 93% of companies in Australia are small to medium-sized enterprises. They're entrepreneurial organizations, and they employ about 60% of the workforce. So government tax incentives, government investment and government policy around small to medium-sized enterprises and how they collaborate really means that Australia is a massively entrepreneurial industry.
Well, that's lovely to know, and it's really important that these examples, these case studies, these points have been raised in this discussion today. But unfortunately, we're out of time. I would have loved to have a longer conversation. But thank you so much, Professor Paddy Nixon, Ravin Mirchandani, and Dr. Monica Kennedy. Thank you for being a part of this special episode of Australian Government and Study Australia present Australian Edge for India's Century in partnership with Times Network. Today, we've spoken about the importance of the education of Australian education, how it can empower students, how it can provide them with real-time global knowledge. And I think that is really important. But stay tuned to the channel for more conversations in this series. Thank you so much for watching.